Welcome. We're going to be talking about organic double crop sunflowers. And when I say northern Illinois, our farm is located 3 hours north of here. I'll have a slide that says a little bit more about us in particular. A little bit of the background here. This was a study we did through the North Central SARE with a North Central SARE research grant. And it was conducted way back in 2021. They've been trying to have me come speak at this conference ever since. But there's just been a variety of different things that always came up and conflicted with me being here until this year. And so finally I'm here to talk about this research project that was done many years ago. And the fun thing is I can look back at this now and put 2025 numbers to it, and we can see how things have maybe changed or not changed. Just so I have a little bit of an idea of who I'm speaking to, how many of you either grow or have grown sunflowers before? Okay, so we have a little bit of sunflower experience. Is there anyone that is, well, maybe I should start with this. I see some people that are not necessarily farmers. Is there any, who are our growers here? Maybe I should, okay. And then a few of you others are industry people or with organizations and stuff. Okay, great. So if you want to, this is obviously being recorded. This was also, I did a webinar presentation and it is up on our YouTube channel. So if you wanted to see another slight variation of this, it is online in a different form as well. So we'll launch into this a little bit here. We'll see this clicker was maybe getting low on power. So we'll see how this goes. I might have to stand. So my name is Jacob Landis. I farm with my brothers, Joshua and Jonathan, and with all the J's, we farm under the enterprise JL Acres, LLC. So my parents began a transition to organic back in 2008. And my brothers and I kind of came back to the farm around that, you can see the 2017, 2018 time frame. And of course, my things are out of order there. So with my two other brothers and my parents, we're managing kind of a couple different entities. So amongst kind of all of us, we're milking about 60 organic dairy cows. We're feeding out the bull calves as fat cattle. Those are not certified. And then combined, we are managing about 1,500 acres of certified or transitioning crop ground as of this year. Now, when we did this research project in 2021, I believe we were closer to 600 or maybe 800 acres. So there's a whole separate presentation on how not to grow too fast that I'm not going to get into, but that's who I am today. You can see we're up in kind of the Whiteside, Lee, Ogle, Bureau counties of Illinois. We have grown corn, soybeans, wheat, cereal rye, hybrid rye, sunflowers, yellow field peas. Barley has been in the history. We are not afraid of trying new things. So that's kind of the general idea. So I have set this up to kind of as a research project presentation. So the format is kind of like that. The challenge, if we're going to be successful organic farmers, we rely on diverse crop rotation to manage fertility and pests. And so in Illinois and the Midwest, we like to do our corn, soybeans, small grain. We know that small grains are kind of nice. They allow us to have that mid-season cut of weeds and some disturbance. But small grains are also not very profitable, especially in the heart of corn, soybean country where your rent is, over $300 an acre and sometimes way over $300 an acre depending on where you're at. So we were thinking of ways of how to generate some extra income with kind of this type of a crop rotation to still get the benefit from the weed control with the small grains, but not be set back as much financially. So one of the solutions that's often advocated for when you're growing a small grain is you frost seed your clover, you grow your fertility for the following corn season. That can work, and it has worked a little bit better now that some of our nitrogen sources are a little bit more expensive, but you still need to make cash flow happen. So you can grow your cover crops as well for forage or grazing. Not everyone has livestock. If you are a little bit further south than we are, you can successfully double crop soybeans. Where we are at in northern Illinois, some years double crop soybeans work, some years they don't. It just depends on the weather and the frost timing. We are really kind of in a gambling area of the world where we're at. So obviously you can grow some other crops like your buckwheat, edible beans. Those can be harder to find markets for. And so we were thinking about sunflowers. I was talking about a little bit before the presentation started that Purdue Agribusiness is the one that got us into growing sunflowers more recently. Our family had grown sunflowers back in that 2008-2010 time frame, When fuel prices were high, if you remember that, there was a little bit of a push for biofuels. Since we sold our milk to Organic Valley, they had a truck that would come to our farm, and we would press out the sunflowers into oil that had everything in it to make our own biodiesel for the farm. And so we did that for 3 to 5 years, I think. We made our own biofuel, and then eventually my brothers and I went off to college, and my parents didn't want to mess with it, so we stopped doing that. Purdue Agribusiness came back into the area, and we're looking for sunflower growers, and so that's when sunflowers became an option for us because we had a market. They grow well with minimal moisture. They're more frost tolerant than soybeans, quite a bit more frost tolerant. They've got the deep taproot. You can see the other things that make them a possibility in this system. They're friendly to pollinators. They look fun. If you have dove hunters, they enjoy sunflowers. So here's the research question then that we're looking at. Can sunflowers be grown as a profitable double crop after winter wheat in northern Illinois in an organic system? That's our official, quote-unquote, research question that we were working with under this grant. So our general plan makes sense. We harvest the wheat. We do a little bit of tillage to take care of weeds. We plant the sunflowers, and then eventually we harvest them. So we fertilized the wheat ahead of time with 2 tons to the acre of poultry litter in early spring, harvested the wheat July 5th. We took the straw off for the dairy. We lightly worked the soil July 8th. We planted July 9th. You can see it there, the variety, the population. We rotary hoed on July 14th. And then we realized we had a problem. And this is where this research project becomes a real-world research project and not just a university research project. We discovered that we had very poor germination and very poor stand. Okay, and so what we did is and I'll have a graph here, 2021 was a very dry year, and so we were very hesitant to completely wipe the slate clean, so we used just a drag harrow to try to aggressively break up some of the weeds, and we tried to replant the sunflowers over the old rows to take advantage of some of the sunflowers that were coming, and then to hopefully add to it, till we figured out the population issue, and we actually got the seeds on the farm. It was July 23rd when we planted these sunflowers. Now, I don't know about where you are at or your different systems. If it was July 23rd, we would probably definitely not be planting soybeans. That would be very late. But for sunflowers, we were going to try it. We had the research grant. This is why they give you money, to try to make mistakes and see how it turns out. So we had this dry summer and the dry fall. We'll see in a little bit that the whole summer leading up to this point was dry. But from July 1st to November 20th, when the sunflowers, right before they were kind of planted and grown, we were operating in a good 7-inch deficit, and actually a lot of that rain, like the 2 inches of the max daily precip, kind of came in 1 week towards the end of September. So really, it was dry. Here's the yellow line on the bottom is 2021, and that box kind of represents when the sunflowers were growing. Do I have a laser pointer? I have a laser pointer. So you can see we were dry all the way leading up to when the sunflowers were planted, so we don't have a lot of soil moisture to work with. We planted the sunflowers, and it still stayed dry, and then I guess it was October, where we finally got a bunch of rain, and of course by then the crop is either made or not made. You can see here, these are the other years. This is the wet year of 2019 is off the charts up there just for comparison. And you can see in general that oftentimes after about this July, we do have a flatlining effect here through parts of July and August. But going into the planting with already being in a deficit and it just continuing, you get a feel for kind of what that season was like. Now, if you remember, I might have skipped one of our plans for this sunflower harvest, and I have it in more detail in a couple slides. We were going to fertilize these sunflowers with feather meal. Feather meal is a great source of nitrogen. It is slow release, and when it is broadcast on the soil surface and it doesn't rain, it doesn't do much. So in the context of all this, when I show you the profitability numbers, you can keep that in mind. The dry weather is not ideal for the feather meal fertilizer that we used. And so I've got a series of pictures here on what this all looked like. You can see right here, these are the sunflowers that were planted July 9th that actually grew, compared to the ones planted July 23rd. So that's the height difference that we are looking at with that much of a delay in planting. With that, you can kind of get a feel for how large these sunflower heads are. for the earlier planted ones. These all, bloomed a little bit earlier, and then the later planted ones are a lot smaller. So one of the unintended consequences of this research grant was when you delay planting by about 3 weeks, you get a lot smaller sunflower head. For comparison, this is a full season sunflower field that we had growing, I think it was that same year. You can see these nice large sunflower heads, nice big canopy. That was a good sunflower field. This is close to harvest. When sunflowers are ripe, that's kind of what they look like. And so then we get to the harvesting part. We harvested November 20th. They were around 14% moisture, which is, there's some differences, opinions on when the ideal harvest moisture is for sunflowers. I maybe would have liked to have seen it closer to 13%, but as I say, rain was coming, we needed to get them out. We have a Gleaner R62 combine, 25-foot head. We just took our bean head out there, and you're going to get some harvest loss with the reel, but especially with the air reel, that I think really helped. We have also at different times hired a neighbor who has just a draper head, and with a draper head, he's able to go through and actually has less harvest loss, head loss, I should say, and it's really kind of a smooth operation if you've got a draper to harvest sunflowers. The other nice thing about a draper, just as an aside, he could slow down the belts and so that it feeds a little bit heavier into the combine so it threshes a little bit more evenly. So anyway, we harvested the soybean or the sunflowers, put them in a bin, put air on them, and we dry them down to about 9%. Sunflowers are great for drying in that you can turn the fan on and they will dry about no matter what the humidity is. They're hard for drying in that sometimes it's hard to get airflow through them. So if you can get air through them, you can just turn the fan on and they'll dry down. Compared to like soybeans, once it gets above 70% humidity, then you're really fighting almost making the soybeans too wet. Sunflowers, as long as it's like below 90% humidity, you're going to dry them down. That's just a general growing sunflowers note. There we go, there's my note. So these are the numbers from 2021. I'll compare them to 2025 here in just a moment. So in 2021, we have our seed costs there of $1,800. Fertilizer and application, which I had our feather meal, which was put on about 132 pounds the acre. I'll talk about how that was, I already mentioned it was kind of a worthless bit of money, but we had the grant money to do it. I have down there the $1,500 of machinery and field operations, which I think that's a little low. I'm not sure, but apparently in 2021 I thought that was accurate. And then these were hauled to Georgia, and so the trucking cost is in there as well, even though that was just taken out of it wasn't a direct expense, but it's all part of it. And so for 30 acres, that's our total cost, give or take. And now, so 2025, I just did some quick math before coming down here. Seed cost is going to run closer to $1,900. Field and machinery operations, I would say that's probably closer to $100 an acre and not $50 an acre. Depends on how you want to count depreciation and things of that nature. I did not calculate any additional fertilizer money, but just on, anyway, you can see the number there. So 2021, with all of those strikes against us, the late planting date, the very dryness, the fertilizer not doing any good, we only harvested 567 pounds per acre off of that field. Nothing to be impressed about. Our price was 38 cents a pound. We got a little bit of a premium for oil. So we grossed about, you can see it there, $7,000 or about a little over $200 an acre. And when you take the cost and the gross, we were in the hole. So break even would have been $715. So that's how it turned out in real world. But I already talked about these sunflowers were planted later than normal. We had well below average rainfall. Fertilizer was not utilized at all, and the truck that we sent to Georgia was half full. So if you had planted them earlier, or maybe noticed the seed issues earlier and gotten them in earlier. Oh, so I have, if you would happen to know Paul Hoffman, he's up near Mendota-ish area. Sometimes he comes to these. He planted sunflowers the same year we did. He also had similar seed issues, but he got them in a little bit earlier. He caught a rain that we didn't, and he had a much better yield. I don't remember what it was off the top of my head, but I remember thinking that was a fairly respectable sunflower yield. So just for fun, if we were to do this differently, or if we didn't have grant money that we could just spend, if we looked and saw, okay, there's been no good weather or no good rain. This fertilizer is not going to be very useful. Let's not spend the money on the fertilizer. We can just take that out. And if we wouldn't have fertilized it at all, we would have come out net positive in 2021. But since we had the grant money and it was in the grant to fertilize, we fertilized. If the truck would have been full and or proportional to the volume that we had in the truck, say we had a neighbor that also had a half load of sunflowers and we could split trucking, you could take out another bit of that cost. Now we are positive a little bit more, $75 an acre. And so if we would have decided to skip the fertilizer, we would have, even just the fertilizer part, say we still send a half truckload, we would have broke even under this worst case scenario. It's kind of how we ended up looking at this research. Bad weather, bad planting, don't worry about fertilizing it, you still break even under quote unquote a worst case scenario. So I put in some numbers of 2025. So if you remember, with the premium in 2021, we had a final price of 41 cents a pound. Same premium with the price that was quoted to me for 2025 a couple months ago. This is all that we would get if we grew sunflowers in 2025, is 33 cents a pound. And so that obviously would lower our gross, and then our break-even would have to be up closer to that 900 pounds. Now, the other way that we can look at this is, well, we could have done soybeans, or we could have done forage, we could have done a cover crop. Would those have turned out better? It's hard to say. We did actually try to overseed a cover crop in those sunflowers because they were shorter and there was sunlight to the ground. I think if we would have actually had some rain that fall, we could have had a cover crop growing underneath those sunflowers. Since then, one of our sunflower fields 2 years ago, we did go in with a drone and seed cover crops into standing sunflowers, and we did get a cover crop to grow up underneath that canopy. So next time, if we were to do this again, we would work on the earlier planting date, we would choose a different fertilizer program, and we'd hope for more rain. So just kind of the summarizing look at the research question. Sunflowers, they can be profitable alternative to double cropping in areas where double crop soybeans are maybe a little riskier. We did learn that sunflowers are pretty resilient in dry weather, and there we talk about worst case scenario. And then obviously it's the research, so you need to do more research to know if this actually is valuable or not. So just in general, if you're interested in growing sunflowers, just a few things to note here. Paying attention to the harvest moisture and the storage needs. If you do put too much nitrogen on fertilizers, too much nitrogen on sunflowers, they can lodge and go down. And then obviously you need the bin and storage space. We had to hold the sunflowers until, I believe it was February or April, until they picked them up. So that's one of the reasons why the last couple of years we have not grown them as much, as we just haven't had the bin space to store them. And obviously, and the price is low. I know some people have struggled with volunteer sunflowers. We have grown them multiple years and never had only once have we had a significant issue with volunteer sunflowers. And I don't know if we're just lucky or why that is, but there's only been one time where we have gone in and we had so many volunteer sunflowers that we had to disc the field under and start over again. I know some people have had success flame weeding sunflowers to at least set them back. Hasn't been as much of an issue for us, so I couldn't tell you a lot of other strategies. And yeah, we already talked about some different cover crop that it could be a possibility. In terms of how do sunflowers affect following crops in the rotation, this was something I was very interested in because the field where we did this research trial, it was 30 acres of a larger 70-acre field. And so the following season after this, we cropped that whole 70 acres as the same crop. And when I was looking at the yield monitor, I did not necessarily see any difference in yield. And maybe as we go through the years, that will show up. But I can't say that if you add sunflowers, you get a yield bump afterwards. That's not necessarily something that we saw in this particular field. But depending on the history of your crop ground, this particular field has had a history of a lot of diverse crop rotation already, and so that's maybe why the sunflowers didn't affect it very much in following years. And then I'll just kind of end with this, since this is a SARE grant that we did this in. I currently have submitted in for a SARE grant that I'm waiting in March, they'll say if we got funded or not. We're going to do some research on giant ragweed control related to soil fertility and foliar feeding. So maybe in another couple of years I can, if we get funding for that, I maybe will do a presentation on what we find out about what causes giant ragweed to grow and maybe how we can manage that through different fertility tools. So that's a down the road thing. And that's what I've got. That's a long way of saying sunflowers maybe could work, but they might have challenges.